for reasons the economy of time, I'll proceed directly to the subject that I'll try to analyze today. So I'll share with you, as usual, the PowerPoint of today's talk. Let me make it more viewable. Okay. I hope everybody can see it without problems. The subject of my talk is the adventures of economic policy within mainstream economics. The background papers are a chapter in English in a first shift for a Greek professor of public economics, and also my forthcoming Greek, The Political Economy of Economic Policy. This will be published in Greek in a few days. It's in the final stage, and it will most probably be published sometime in the future by Routledge, because it was asked for. Now, I'll move directly to make a brief summary, actually to pinpoint the main points of my talk. Economic policy as a special subject, a specific study area, covers the aims and the instruments of state economic interventionism. As such, that is, as a broad problematic about the economic role of the state, economic policy existed from the very birth of the science of the economy. That is, the forefathers, the founders of the science of the economy, Smith, Ricardo, classical political economy, other economists during that period, all of them engaged more or less with the issue of the economic role of the state and the state economic policies. However, this was a broader problematic at that period of time. The economic policy as a special subject area, specifically defined and so on, it was inaugurated in during the interwar era, and it was formalized in the beginning of the post-World War, post-Second World War era. Now, within mainstream economics, economic policy had a rather tumultuous historical course. It moved from the initial highs of the interwar and the Keynesian era to the lows of the neoliberal era. And then, since the beginning of the 21st century, we are witnessing a return of active economic policy. However, as I will argue, this return of economic policy, at least within mainstream economics, not at least, speaking always about mainstream economics, is, in my opinion, both belated and also very problematic. I will argue that this return of activist economic policy since the beginning of the 21st century is under the auspices of the new dominant paradigm, that is, new Keynesianism. And I'll try to show that the conception that new Keynesianism has about economic policy is very contradictory and very problematic. So these are the main points of my talk. And let me proceed directly to each one of them. The first section is about the prehistory of economic policy. A fundamental point that I think it's very clear nowadays in the economic debates and the economic in economics literature and the debates between economists of different schools is that state economic interventionism has been always crucial for capitalism's functioning. Polanyi, in his classical main book, has made a very accurate point. He argued that a self-regulated market system is a rather rare moment in humankind's history, and especially in capitalism, and not especially, even in capitalism. And that means in the system of capitalist economy, which is a system where the market predominates, even in this case, and even in the case of capitalism, a self-regulated market, that is a market without some form of economic intervention, that is, without some form of economic policy, is an exceptional case, not the rule. It's the exception. Of course, Marx had put this argument even more forcefully when he argued that the state and its economic role, its economic intervention, is always present and required for the reproduction of a capitalist economy, because the state has to operate as a collective capitalist, that is, as the guarantor of the collective interests of the social of the capitalist system, that in separation from the specific special interests, lobbies, and so on that exist within a capitalist economy. So the first point I want to stress is that contrary to neoliberal mantras, state economic interventionism, the economic role of the state and thus economic policy were always present during the history of capitalism. The second point I want to stress is that a point that within mainstream economics is usually lost or disregarded. What is this point? It is the following. The very birth of the capitalist system, that is the long process of transition from feudalism to capitalism in Western Europe, the classical case we have. In this long process, the state played a crucial role in supporting capital accumulation. This is predominantly evident in the so-called mercantilist period. Mercantilism was not only a stream in economic thought, it was also a very long historical period when capitalist economic relations emerged out of the old feudal economic relations. The state played an active role in supporting these capitalist economic activities. So state economic intervention in the form of state regulations, protectivism, economic support, even state factories as providers of cheap intermediate inputs in capitalist to capitalist enterprises, with a typical characteristic of the mercantilist era, particularly the late mercantilist era. So the second point I want to stress is that the state played an active role in establishing capitalism. The third point I want to stress is the following, that even during the high period of classical liberalism, that is during the 19th century, that was a period when both in theory and in practice, a state economic intervention was supposed to be minimized. It was minimized indeed, but it never ceased to exist. Socialist problematics. That's a long and quite different story, although it's very different, very interesting. And I'll focus on the evolution of economic policy in the West, and particularly within mainstream economics. This construction of economic policy within mainstream economics at that period, the interwar period, was based on two axes. The first axis was the formalization of a set of economic policies, that is, to define fiscal, monetary, industrial, external economic policy, social policy, to define them as specific subjects and not just so to create a more defined area and its aims and its tools, not just simply a broad problematic about the economic role of the state. So a formalization of the set of economic policies, which was influenced by the then dominant Keynesian tradition, and also a creation of macroeconomic models geared towards policy, to create macroeconomic models not only to explain the economy, but also to direct, regulate, and ultimately plan the economy. Now, several figures, prominently among them Jan Tinbergen and Ragnar Friis, were instrumental in this, particularly Tinbergen. Tinbergen is associated in the West, because in the East it is a different story. In the West, Tinbergen is the father of economic policy as a specific subject. Now, this creation of the economic policy as a specific study area was not without controversies. It was done within the auspices of Keynesianism, not neoclassicism. But we know very well that Keynes was very suspicious of Tinbergen's approach, and he actually if you read Keynes' relevant papers on that, he criticizes, how can I say, in a very coveted, but at the same time very blunt way, Tinbergen's attempt. What was the main point of Keynes' critique of Tinbergen? Despite Tinbergen creating macroeconomic models that were demand-side oriented, that is Keynesian, what Keynes didn't like, Keynes did not believe in operational macroeconomic models. He preferred doing economic policy ad hoc, but not within the strict confines and demands of an overall macroeconomic model. So this critique is a long-running critique within mainstream economics. I'll try to explain later on that Friedman's critique against economic policy and Tinbergen, Milton Friedman's, to a great extent copied and reiterated Keynes' critique, both in theoretical terms and also in practical terms regarding macroeconomic modeling and the use of statistics. Now, let us return. Okay, Keynes had his reservations and he and he expressed his reservations quite openly. But the economic policy bandwagon proceeded. What were its main pillars? First, the centrality of the public sector. That was a thing that was in no doubt during the interwar and the first post-Second World War period. The second pillar was an overall emphasis on planning. I picked just two of a lot of references there. One by Darby, a conservative social democrat English economist, not Marxist, who said in 1949, "We are all planners now." And also Alvin Hansen's, the doyen of Keynesianism during that period in the US, who pronounced the death of individualism in economic policy, and thus collective, that is state policies. And the third pillar was the use of econometrics in order to formalize and calibrate economic policies. Not only Hansen, Timbergen, but Ragnar Fritz was very instrumental in this. We have to create macroeconomic models for the whole economy and models that can be calibrated econometrically and used to make forecasts and thus planning. So during that period, we have a very strong development of econometrics, not as a means for economic policies, for calibrating economic policies. Now, the Second World War emphasized the need for a planned management of the economy, because, as I said, a war economy is more or less always a planned economy. A typical example is the work of OPA, the Office of Price Administration in the US, where Galbraith worked, Galbraith the father, right? The OPA managed some thousand of prices of goods in a capital, in the US capitalist economy. So it was a very extended statement, is that the market is self-regulated. But there might be exceptions to this rule. The exceptions are a minority, but there are exceptions. What can be the exceptions? Now, there were several suggestions. For example, Rogoff in his 1985 paper said that if there exist general uncertainties, then this might lead to specific market failures, and then state economic intervention, that is economic policy, has to come to the rescue. The cavalry comes to the rescue, but what should do the cavalry? The cavalry should return not an imperfect market to the situation of a perfect market, nothing else. So the cavalry should not have objectives of its own. It should only restore the proper functioning of the market. Now, this was further developed by Sargent, where Sargent argues that uncertainty can arise in the form of imperfect information, and this imperfect information can lead to misperceptions, both policy makers and private agents. So here we have a lack laxing of the rational expectations hypothesis. Another move to this direction was made with game theory. Game theory was a means to try to make all this neoliberal, unrealistic, and very static and dogmatic perspective to make it more not more realistic, or to bring it closer to reality. Very early in the 1980s, they began to use the mathematical instrument of game theory as a model for modeling the behavior of different players by considering separate but not independent optimization problems. And this was supposed to give a more dynamic character in neoliberal analysis and arguments, built upon game theory and so on, and tried also to introduce a theory of social conflict, but a social conflict that it is not a class conflict. Now, very briefly regarding the new Keynesian views. The new Keynesianism, in my opinion, became the new orthodoxy in the beginning of the 21st century because of the failure of neoliberalism. Now, new Keynesianism has a almost schizophrenic attitude. It is Keynesian in the short run and new classical in the long run. So they espouse rational expectations, dynamic stochastic general equilibrium modeling, and so on. And but they also recognize the existence of short-term rigidities in the economy that can cause disequilibrium. If this is correct, then economic policy is required in order to correct these rigidities and solve this disequilibrium. So new Keynesianism picked up and refined new conservative views like those of Rogoff, but also extended them. They introduced also nominal rigidities, not only real rigidities, and then they proceeded to propose a new theory of economic policy, and even some, at least, of the new Keynesians propose a return to the Timbergen-Thale perspective. But on the other hand, they keep the new classical rational expectations long-term perspective and also big chunks of public choice theory and game theory in their analysis. Now, and I conclude with this. This new Keynesian return of activist economic policy is very contradictory. It is weak because it cannot comprehend the long-term stability of the capitalist system, and contrary even to traditional Keynesianism, it ascribes to a long-term neoclassical utopia of self-regulating markets, and also it is very conservative in the sense that traditional Keynesianism came together with a regulated but existing redistribution from capital to labor. New Keynesianism does not aspire to this. It simply wants to regulate a modern capitalist economy, but it does not consider as important a redistribution, an income redistribution from capital to labor. So regulation, state economic intervention, economic policy, but not redistribution from capital to labor. Of Keynesian, the previous Keynesian orthodoxy to forecast and then to solve the 1973-75 crisis. The interesting point there is that the Keynesian policies that were effective in the aftermath of the 1929 crisis were extremely ineffective in the aftermath of the 1973 crisis for a number of reasons. I keep a traditional Marxist view on this, that is the movement of profitability and capital accumulation. The effectiveness of different economic policies depends upon the phase of the economic cycle. Monetary policy can be, the same monetary policy can be effective during one period, and the same monetary policy can be very ineffective during another period. So all this controversy between Keynesians and neoclassicals and neoliberals, is the fiscal policy the big gun, or is the monetary policy the big gun, or none of them? It's actually a futile debate. Fiscal policy can be the big gun under certain circumstances. Monetary policy can be under another. A policy mix between of these two can be effective in some circumstances and ineffective in others, in different circumstances. Hope I've